I used to fly as a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines for 4 years before I decided to leave everything behind and come to Canada. I still have people asking me what life is like working as a flight attendant. So in this video, I want to share the pros and cons of working as a flight attendant based on my experience working with Singapore Airlines for 4 years. Oh my god, it was very cold outside and I just came back to my small apartment and we're going to continue with the video. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Febby and on this channel I share stories and lessons from my non-linear life journey to help you navigate yours and feel less alone in the process. I want to start this video on a high note, so let's start with the pros first and then we'll get to the cons. Number one is I didn't have to take my work home. Once the aircraft doors opened, my workday was done and I was able to switch off immediately. Personally for me, this was my favorite thing about flying and it is still my favorite thing about flying now that I've left flying for a couple years and went to corporate. The feeling of not having to think about work and the feeling of knowing that once the aircraft door is open and I bid my passengers goodbye, my workday is done. Now that I work in the corporate world, a 9-to-5 job, I do find this very, very challenging and I think I really have to try really hard to compartmentalize myself, transition myself out of work mode every single work day and make sure that work is not all I think about, because it's really easy to get sucked into that constant thinking mode about work and not having time for anything else in your life. And I think this definitely varies from person to person. I'm just speaking from my own experience because I work in a management job and I do think that my job requires quite a lot of mental and brain power. It's not that I'm able to just not care about work and go about my personal life. It's not that manual. Number two is there's less politics versus working a corporate job. To start off, the airline can be pretty hierarchical and it really depends on what airline you join. And for me personally, I used to work for Singapore Airlines, which is an Asian airline, and the culture is very hierarchical and very seniority based. And this applies to a lot of things in the day-to-day operations, such as being able to choose your work position, being able to choose your meal, being able to choose your rest time, and so on and so forth. I think it's just different. It's not politics, but it's more like hierarchy and you just need to respect the seniority. I think one thing as well is because in the airline, during my time, for example, I used to fly with different people every single time. And so I feel like there's no time for politics. It's very different versus corporate when you keep seeing the same people over and over and you have to work with them, whether you like it or not, until you move on or they move on. But I think because the system that is designed for airlines is different, so there's no time for politics. And if you think about it, what really is politics? Politics is really just about working with people, people forming alliances, people forming allies and things like that. However, because in the airline world, or at least the airline that I used to work for, which is Singapore Air, I would fly with different people every single time. There's just no opportunity to go there. Another thing also is that you don't care as much about your personal brand. When I was flying, I think all I think about is I want to try to be a decent human being today, do my job well, and that's it. However, if I compare it to other worlds, for example, the corporate world, corporate world is all about reputation. It's all about your profile. So it's very different now that I look back and compare what I used to care about when I was flying versus what I would care about now that I am in the corporate world and have left flying. Point number three is the starting pay is pretty good, especially with someone with no prior work experience. For me personally, when I joined the airline, I had some work experience, but it wasn't much. I had some short stint with a global company in marketing, but it was an internship. And then I also had an experience working with a startup also in marketing. And I know that many of you guys who come and watch my video come from different parts of the world, and depending on where you come from, you would have different perception or perspective about the flight attendant job. And what I mean by this is that, for example, if you go to many parts of Asia, like Korea, Japan, China, or even Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, flight attendant is actually a pretty prestigious job. It's pretty highly regarded because of all the skepticism or all the stereotypes that come with it. And it pays pretty well as compared to working a corporate job as an example in many parts of Asia. However, now that I live in Canada, I know that people see a flight attendant career or a flight attendant job very, very differently. I think it's because it doesn't pay as well, and also the requirements to get in are very different with the airlines in Asia. The airlines in Asia tend to be super, super strict, and it is a very competitive world to get into. So I think like the differences in like requirements and acceptance rate, those sort of contribute to the perception of working as a flight attendant. And since we're talking about pay here, I want to say that a lot of the times in Asia, when you work as a flight attendant or when you start out as a flight attendant, the pay is actually pretty decent, and it's often above the starting pay of a corporate job or like a role in the corporate world. And I know that that is not necessarily the case in North America as an example. I don't know about Europe. I would be curious to know if anybody here who's watching and familiar with the aviation industry in Europe, like please share your thoughts, because I really want to know how things typically work there. And the last point in terms of the upside is the classic being able to travel the world claim, which I think is true to a certain extent, even though it can be in a touch and go manner. I probably wouldn't have had the chance to go to that many cities had I not flown as a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines. And I would argue that a lot of people say that this is not necessarily the perk anymore because travel is a lot more accessible now, which is true. I don't disagree with that. However, I think it's really, really hard to beat the lifestyle of working as an international flight attendant. For example, when I was still flying, this week I would be in London, next week I would be in China, the following week I would be in Australia. I don't know of many jobs that would give you that kind of like traveling perks, unless you are like a celebrity or like a manager of a celebrity, or I don't know, maybe like someone who is in the really high position at a global company and your role requires you to travel that often. Otherwise, I really couldn't think of any jobs who could give you this level of intensity when it comes to traveling. Number 5 is the excitement. When I was flying, it felt like I was going on a year-long adventure, and I would only know where I would be next month when my schedule came out. So it was really exciting, at least at the beginning. What adventure will I have next month? What cities will I visit next month? And things like that. And it is also because there were many places that I had never been to. So every time my schedule came out, more often than not, that would mean an opportunity for me to visit new cities, the places that I had never been to before. So obviously, after a while, the excitement wore off, which I think is a good segue to talking about the downsides of the job. And for this video, I have 4 points that I want to share with you, which I hope will be helpful for you. Number 1 is it is a physically taxing job, from like the work itself and also the constant jet lag. I will say that the work itself is physically very taxing because of the nature of working as a flight attendant. I used to work irregular hours, and by saying irregular hours, I don't even know what kind of measuring stick you could use to justify that it is not as irregular, because let's just say today I start work at 4 a.m. and tomorrow I start work at 4 a.m. But if tomorrow I am in another city or in another country even, the 4 a.m. could mean a different time as compared to what the 4 a.m. of my body clock is. And over time, it did take a toll on my health and my mental health as well, because being on a constant jet lag means like you would have many, many sleepless nights, or you would kind of miss out on seeing the sunlight because you would be too tired to wake up, and then you would just sleep through your day and then wake up in the middle of the night with nothing around. And that's when you wanted to start your day, but then everybody else's day already ended. So it was a very interesting experience in that sense. And having gone through that experience for a good couple of years, I will say that definitely was one of the major downsides that I would like to mention and share with everybody who is curious to learn more about the flight attendant lifestyle. Obviously, it's manageable. You just got to pick your battles. But for me, this was one of the major downsides of working as a flight attendant. Number 2 is unpredictable schedule. So remember I mentioned earlier when I talked about the upside that it was always exciting for me, especially the first 2 years, to not know where I'll be next month until my schedule came out. And after a while, that excitement kind of turned into unpredictability because, you know, over time, my priority changes. I think after a while, I'd rather be at home celebrating my mom's birthday versus having breakfast in London as an example. But I wouldn't know like where I'll be on a particular date until my schedule comes out, and it is not always possible to ask for a day off on a particular date because again, it's based on seniority, like there's a ballot system, there's a lot more to being able to have more control over your own schedule. But in general, I will say that you don't really have control, unfortunately. Number 3 is it can get very lonely. So remember earlier when I said that I would fly with different people every time, and that would make it really hard to have things such as politics or something equivalent to office politics because there's not enough time to kind of form alliances in that manner. And I think that is an upside. However, the downside is it can get very lonely. I would fly with different people every time, and even when I meet someone whom I really vibe with and want to get to know more, it's really hard to go past that flight buddy because number 1, everybody has different schedules, and number 2, like once you're back in your base, and in my case, it was Singapore, everybody has their own lives to take care of. And everybody else, including myself, also, we all have people that we want to spend time with because we are not able to spend as much time with them because we're almost always away. And even if you make friends with the person, it's very unlikely that you'll see the person again on the next flight because of this roster system that I mentioned earlier. And so again, when you're at work, you'll still feel lonely because there's nobody that you really know beforehand. I was just in that constant cycle of getting to know other people and saying goodbye to other people, and it became very exhausting after a while. And the last point, which I think is somewhat contradicting to the last upside that I mentioned earlier, is that it is a touch and go traveling. So again, I am super grateful for being able to go to so many places and explore so many cities and just being exposed to so many kinds of cultures and different kind of city vibes and different kinds of ways of living, which I think truly shapes me into who I am today. However, after a while, I also learned and noticed and realized that a touch and go traveling is not the same with traveling. Like, in order for me personally to be able to really immerse in a culture, really have something that I know I can take away from after visiting a place, is when I'm able to spend at least a couple days in that place, whether it's a city, whether it's a country, and even sometimes a country itself is very diverse. Like sometimes it's really hard to understand a culture of a country, maybe just like culture of that particular city that I visit. I think after a while, it became a bit meaningless to me to only step foot in a city and be there for 24 hours, at example, and then come back to Singapore and then ask myself, okay, I've been there. Like technically I have been to this place, I was there, but I don't really know anything about this place because 1, I probably was too tired to really be present, and 2, it was too short for me to really learn anything about this place other than maybe a very service level thing like, oh, the pastry was amazing or whatever, but it was really hard for me to have an opinion on that particular place. Okay, there you have it, folks. The 5 upsides and the 4 downsides of working as a flight attendant that I shared based on my experience working as a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines for 4 years. What are your thoughts on the pointers I just shared? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you are also flying or used to fly or know of someone in your circle who is flying as a flight attendant, please share your opinions because I'm always curious to learn about what people think and their experience and how it is different or similar to mine. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.